Awesome. All right, cool. So thanks everybody for coming over in the East Coast. It's like 4:30. So but so we're here to present some work that we've been doing at UNCW. My name's Dr. Cummings, and I have Edzordzi Agbozo and Colleen Reilly who will be following up with me about some of the research that we've done originally for an edited collection, but hopefully will be published in TCQ in the future. Just to give you an overview of where we're going with this panel, what we wanted to explore how technical editors are using AI in real life. We have a lot of theoretical ideas, a lot of people, making predictions and things like that, but we wanted to see what it looked like for real on the ground. So we did a lot of interviews. I'll talk about that in a second. But the panel, I'm going to talk about some of the theory that informs what we're doing, and then Edzordzi is going to do practical applications or things that we learned from some of the interviews, and Dr. Reilly will be talking about pedagogical implications. So just the kind of the context of setting this up, I think, everybody's familiar with this context, but, generative AI systems are really advancing fast. And in fact, like a lot of changes have happened since we did this research project, which is interesting to think about. But, a lot of the tools are advancing faster than practices, especially in specific kinds of workplaces in the technical world. I see in my world a lot of use of these tools in like the creator world and the you know what, okay, no. And then I think that was a misplaced slide. Okay. And then and as well as like in small businesses and things like that. And then we also see it kind of making us rethink what it means to be a technical writer. And as we kind of found, like the shift isn't like total shift right now. And also thinking about what are the new skills that maybe technical writers bring, or the old ones that they have always had that will contribute to help us integrate these AI systems in an ethical way. So our research project, we explore the different dynamics between the human editors and the AI systems, specifically in professional contexts. Just to tell you, I'll let my co-presenters introduce themselves, but just real quickly, I actually encountered AI in the creator economy, which is why I've seen a lot of it being used in that context, and thinking about how it integrates in the writing process. I do have a Substack called Cyborgs Writing, but a lot of the way that I think about AI and technical editing has been informed by the Content Wrangler, and hopefully some of you have not heard of this, but if you haven't, definitely check out Content Wrangler. They're having high-level conversations about AI and content operations and content development. I think it's an important conversation for technical editors, even though I think a lot of us don't have the opportunities to implement some of those things, as we'll find out. But very interesting conversations, and really I think should be informing our theory of how AI fits into the tech writing process. So the methodology of our project, we interviewed 12 participants from both the US and Europe. We used a phenomenological approach, basically trying to have the interviewees talk about the context in which they're using AI, but also thinking about the more broader contexts so that we can really understand what's influencing the way that they make decisions about AI. We did use AI a little bit to identify thematic patterns, but also we used what's called collaborative interpretation of the interviews, where we as a team together work together to identify themes and patterns in that. And in a way, you can kind of see AI as just kind of another part of that team. It didn't do it for us. We were just kind of used it to explore some of those ideas and themes alongside us. This is what the industry distribution looked like. Is mostly technology and software, with a little bit in the financial, but even the financial, I would say, is probably in the technology area. Most of them identified as technical writers, but we did have a few content designers, documentation engineers, technical editors, product managers. And you can kind of see like potential evolutions of what our role is going to be called, particularly I would say in the idea of content design and documentation engineering. Here are some of the tools that they used. Pretty much mostly fairly well available tools. ChatGPT, Copilot, Grammarly, Claude, Gemini, and then a few other less popular use. Acrolinks was probably maybe the most interesting one people might want to look into, which is like I would say Grammarly on steroids. That you can really shape it and particular to your company context. And then experience level was pretty balanced, but mostly intermediate. And most of our interviewees were in the United States, with a few in Europe. Honestly, a lot from my network of connections on LinkedIn. I also have a study abroad in Europe, so I've met a lot of tech writers over in Europe. And so right now, kind of a small population and a selective population of interviewees, but a good place to get started. So thinking about the theory behind the theory behind our thinking about how technical editing might be evolving is thinking about how technology has evolved technical editing work in the first place. So, originally focusing on grammar, style, accuracy. I think you've already seen a focus on structure, organization, consistency, using things like CMSs and data and more highly technical systems for content, and then even before AI, I think we were seeing the idea of content designer, looking at experience architecture. Now that's integrating AI, but creating knowledge bases, things like that, information architecture. And I think this is where like easy AI is kind of an easy fit into that if technical editors are already familiar with that element of the job. And so in a sense, we can think of this in terms of machine rhetorics, where tech writers are not just maybe thinking about how to use AI in the workplace, but learning how to basically imbue these large language models with rhetorical awareness and effectiveness. And techniques like this, prompt engineering is one a lot of people know about, but also thinking about knowledge graphs, structured content. So basically kind of designing the content around these content systems that potentially can integrate AI. So in a sense, in our mind, at least in my mind, the theory is that we're moving, at least in the tech writing world, we're moving towards a content design paradigm where actually the AI does like 90% of the writing, and then the human input is like a 5%, and then the output is 5%. So the tech writers spend a lot of time tweaking and manipulating and shaping the back end of these AI systems. But then they also have to review those outputs to make sure that they're, high quality, that they're ethical, and all these things. And that definitely, this is the way that a lot of tech writers are talking about it in Content Wrangler. But how that looks on the ground, is, I would say, in a lot of ways different than that right now. But what this does is shift our focus less on content creation and more on, or less on writing, and thinking more in terms of how do we create content. Writing is, of course, one way that we create content, but there's also many other ways that we create content, and now AI is going to be one of those. So being able to optimize AI tools, I think, will be important in this context. Also being able to evaluate AI outputs for quality, and and then content strategy or strategic oversight. These are all, I would say, skills that AI can't really do or can't really do by itself. These are important human qualities that the writer mindset brings to these systems that engineers don't bring, AI doesn't bring. And so these are good skills to be focused on um, to to preserve the relevance of tech editors in these contexts. These are here are some theoretical perspectives that we've used to think about this project. That humans aren't actually maybe on top of the complex systems, and so we're actually starting to see different balances of AI. I actually was listening to a YouTube recently about how there isn't a place in the world that AI hasn't or that technology hasn't touched or humans haven't touched. And so we're in kind of a new era where these systems are changing. Hart Davidson had a writing with robots framework, like way back in actually 2013. He was talking about how we might be shifting to having little robots, teams of robots helping us write. And I think we're seeing that already. People are calling this the year of the agents. So creating AI agents to do our work for us. There's a lot of dangers in that, but that's for another talk. And then thinking about rhetorical load sharing or the human in the loop idea that was expressed by Knowles in 2024. And then Carden also talked about the affordances of AI. So it pretty much excels in generic writing. It also is really good at recycling information. Those are two things that technical writers do a lot of, right? But as far as depth and originality, it doesn't do as well. So I hear a lot of tech writers talk about, and they were already doing this without AI, but finding ways to do generic writing and reuse information faster. So that they can focus on the things that require depth and originality, or user research or things like that, because there's always too much content to make, and so even before AI, I noticed a lot of tech writers, learning to code and learning to use different software environments to make the top part easier so they could focus on this part. And I think in a lot of ways, AI is just an extension of that. And so on one end of this content design model, you have fine tuning. So McKee and Porter talk about this by complementing the strengths. So you have you're collaborating with the machine. You're adding the rhetorical intelligence, and you're trying to complement those strengths by fine tuning at the front end, and then verifying that output but for accuracy, bias, and ethical considerations. What we found is that maybe this theory didn't quite match up with what is happening in the ground right now. I think a lot of tech writers, it's very uneven, I would say, but a lot of tech writers struggle to integrate AI into adoption because of data privacy constraints. So they're not allowed to use it, or legal and security concerns. Not only being able to use certain safe applications, like Copilot, I think a lot of times. And really, we see them making small incremental workflow improvements rather than making these huge, AI systems, right off the bat. So I am going to skip forward here. So common use cases that we found, and Edzordzi is going to talk a little bit more about this, but a lot of first drafts, routine documentation, style consistency, translation assistance. We saw a lot of experimentations with that, and a lot of concern about unsafe use cases. That if you know what the results should be, then AI is a good thing to have to help you do something. But if you But an unsafe example would be to summarize a document that you've never read. So really, the evolution of technical writing in the AI era is less of a revolution right now anyway, and more of an adaptation. So using human judgment, ethical considerations, and contextual understanding are still pretty essential. And I would argue that's always been what writers bring to the tech writing world, to the technology world. But at the same time, like starting to think about content beyond just the words on the paper, which honestly I think tech writers are really good at. But we need to like emphasize that and communicate that to stakeholders. But learning, experimenting with some of these collaboration skills, but also thinking about acquiring other technical foundations. We had some interviewees who were basically using AI to learn code, small bits of code to help them do some of their job, and just really strengthening that rhetorical expertise. So I'm going to pass this on to Edzordzi. He's going to talk about editor experiences, and then Dr. Reilly will end it with pedagogical implications.
Okay, yeah. So I did not get the gamma bug, and so I'm going to work on that in future presentations because it's lovely. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some guiding principles for pedagogical development that came out of what we were finding in our research, interviewing all of these technical writers and editors. So as Lance indicated, we are in a period of rapid technological development, and we have an uneven preparation of students at our institution at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, to garner skills and navigate their ability to collaborate with AI tools. And so we have some students who are really using things, but often without much of a framework. And then we have a lot of students who really haven't done much with AI tools and are actually very nervous to do so. So what I focused on this year in a couple of my classes was to create structured activities that incorporate metacognition so that students are thinking through a safe use case that I present to them and go through structured processes and actually document their progress through those processes and have a sort of deliverable that involves critical reflections about the benefits and challenges of using whatever AI tool we're using. And we used Copilot because it has commercial data protection at our institution. And one of the things I try to impress upon with students is issues of privacy and issues of digital surveillance, and giving away your data is not always the best option, even though they feel like they're doing that all the time and it's not a big deal. So I teach a class called Technical Editing. It's a 300 level class. And so we integrated AI in several ways, using Grammarly for several projects, using Copilot, with the inspiration from our interviews to brainstorm potential revisions to things. So asking Copilot to present a student with several ways of revising something or editing something, and then deciding which ones to use and developing prompts that would encourage that. So we also did some preparation for this by reading and discussing scholarship, and thinking through what is a safe and unsafe use case. We found that to be a really generative way of discussing different things that you might do with AI tools, and then practice writing prompts. And we also had one of our participants from our interviews was kind enough to have a session with my students online, and they were able to interview him about his work as a technical editor. So that was really great and gave them some sort of real world inspiration for how this might be working. the students were to edit an employee handbook. I give them like 10 pages that they're supposed to edit and create a style sheet, and then also turn in a memo that talks about which passages they submitted to Copilot and what suggestions they received and what suggestions they were able to implement. And so I can show you some responses from those reflective memos in a minute that kind of reflect what the students got out of doing this kind of activity. This is what I specifically asked them to do in their interactions with Copilot. And one of the things I like to focus on with these kinds of assignments is that not only do I want to see the students' prompts, but I also want to see the responses that they received. And I want to see the follow-ups that they gave so that we can talk about the process of prompt generation and improving the thought process and problem solving related to that. So I always have them turn in those things. And so the students' insights were kind of in 3 different categories. One, and they really aligned with what our participants indicated in our interviews that we did with the working technical writers and editors in the fall. So they used the Copilot to clarify complex content and make it more digestible to their target audience. And so it allowed them to streamline some of the information. It allowed them to shorten various sections and reorganize some of the content. Another thing that our participants talked about a lot was using Copilot or another AI to brainstorm alternate ways of saying something. So if they were going to write a user response for a dialog box or something like that for the application they were editing, they may ask the AI to give them like 3 different ways of saying it, and then use one of those ways. So that was one of the things I had the students do with this employee manual. And they got some really interesting responses, some of which they used, some of which they did not use. And one of the things that a number of students noted is reflected in this 3rd quotation, where they would get 3 completely different versions from Copilot, not really, and even if they followed up and asked a follow-up kind of prompt, then they would get 3 more versions, not really, because Copilot doesn't really do revision. It does reiteration. And so it would iterate more, but it wouldn't iterate like building on the iterations that it already produced. And so they found that to be kind of frustrating because that's not how humans kind of revise. They also thought a lot about how the outcomes that they received and whether or not these would be useful in an actual editing context. So they thought that some of the responses were either overly robotic, uninteresting, or too formulaic, and did not sound like something that would connect with audiences. So that could have been also based on the way that they wrote their prompts. Although when we talked a lot about, trying to get responses that sounded more like people, then or college students or workers or something like that, the AI would give them things that sounded too colloquial and really kind of humorous in how colloquial they actually were, and in adding things like "hey man" and "hey woman" and this kind of thing. Really strange. So and that led to a discussion of like what the AI thinks humans are based on all of the content that it has been trained on, and that's an interesting thing to think about and reflect on in class. So another class that we instituted, an AI-related assignment, actually several, but I'm only going to talk about one. I run a little writing program for our Cameron School of Business here at UNCW. It's a 1-hour online writing class that connects to a 2-hour in-person business course to form a 3-hour writing intensive course. I create all the content for the writing portion of the course, and I have 15 sections of that course staffed by other instructors who do all the commenting on student work. So the business school asked me to institute an AI projects within the assignments in that course. So one of the things that the students are doing in that course is writing employment documents. So they created cover letters and those types of things. So we used the Copilot to brainstorm potential revisions to the students' cover letters. So they also read information from Microsoft about AI. They also read several use guides and thought about some of the ethical issues related to using generative AI tools before they engaged in this assignment. They were to turn in 4 things, a reflection memo, and that's the primary thing that is commented on by my instructors in response to this assignment. They also submit a draft of their cover letter, the exchange that they have with Copilot, their resume, and a copy of the job advertisement that they're targeting. So that they have a whole package of what it was they were trying to get Copilot to help them do. The process for, again, one of the things I like to give students is a very structured process so that they can all, one, be doing the same kinds of activities, but to actually think through all the subcategories of steps that they need to do in order to get the outcome that they want to get when interacting with Copilot or some other AI tools. So they needed to actually write their own cover letter. They needed to get into Copilot and actually sign in. They needed to give Copilot all of the information about them. So their cover letter, their resume, the job ad, and the questions that they were going to ask Copilot to help them answer and help them to improve their cover letter. And then they had to save all of the responses and interactions and write their reflective memo where they put this all together. Their memo was to answer these 4 categories of things related to their interactions with the AI. So what kinds of suggestions did they get that were useful? Did anything surprising, unexpected, or inappropriate come forward? And there's a standard stream of inappropriate things that Copilot asked them to do, and I'll tell you about those in a minute. What would how this might change their writing process, and what ethical issues. And this was actually linked to another article about ethical issues in case they could not think of any. They could then use that to help them generate some ideas about what might be happening. So in terms of useful suggestions, there were a number of categories of these that are reflected by these student quotations from their reflections. One of them is that it helped them write more succinctly and use stronger, what they perceived to be stronger or more impactful language. They also, many of their cover letters lacked good introductions and good conclusions. And the Copilot pointed that out. And a number of students mentioned that they were like, oh, wait, this is really important to have a strong introduction and a strong conclusion. So Copilot was very useful in that regard. Surprising, inappropriate, and unexpected. So the first quotation reflects a theme in that vein, and it is that they would submit all the information about them to Copilot, and then Copilot would tell them to say things that were not true about themselves in their cover letter. And this happened over and over again. And so the Copilot would say, using specific data that didn't exist, it would tell them to say that they had done such and such things. Extrapolating, obviously, from the things that they had actually accomplished, and then putting that into context with what Copilot knows about other people who do those things, assumedly. So it was very interesting, and you see this over and over again. They also saw some mismatch between the advice they were getting from Copilot and the kinds of jobs they were applying to, and their actual experience and what they were going to be really asked to do in those positions. So I guess Copilot was really like helping the student be more like a fast food worker or something, but they really wanted to be a social media communication specialist. Very different. They did say a lot of good things about changes to their writing process. They thought it's really important to get feedback from someone. And so Copilot was that someone, and that was very useful. And then also thinking about audience and thinking about really, connecting what they're trying to do to the mission of the organization. So that was something that really stood out. And then lastly, they were pretty insightful. Maybe the AI generated this for them, who knows, but they were quite insightful about the ethical issues that were arising with the use of AI. Many of them mentioned the privacy issues. Many of them mentioned that, the way in which the cover letter represented them may not be real and was somehow perhaps even inauthentic and not really telling the audience who the reader really, or who the writer really is. So that was something that was very troubling to a number of the students. They also, a number of people mentioned how access to AI tools, especially ones that you have to pay for, would lead to an uneven playing field in terms of application. I mean, there's always that uneven playing field, but they thought this was kind of exacerbating that situation. So in both of these courses, having, and I'm going to stop sharing, having the metacognitive piece where students really, in a structured way, reflected on their use of the AI and the way and the outcomes that they received was something that I thought was very, at this point in time, for the level of students that I'm working with, very fruitful, and is something that I think could be applied in many different contexts.
All right, so I am going to present to you some of the data from our interviews. So basically, I'm going to categorize this data into these 4 themes. We had in all about 6 themes from the data, but I would just talk about this 4. And Colleen and Lance have already spoken about most of them, so I'll just highlight some of those that have not yet been highlighted. So basically, the first theme was speed and efficiency, which our interviewers thought Copilot helps them to do. And by speed and efficiency, they think they are thinking here about how they use a Copilot to help them do editing and drafting. And one particular editor said they also use, as a Copilot, AI tools, use AI tools to help create other tools for editors to use and writers to use. So it's the AI is not helping just this particular editor and technical writer, but it's also being used as a way of a tool within a tool, in a way. And so these are some of the things that they said. Andrew, for instance, indicated that it helps in brainstorming. Martina was the one that used it as a program writer to write program for other writers to use. And then Michelle says she tends to use it to do copy editing because she thought that was the place that I think she used not ChatGPT. She used ChatGPT. That she thought that was the place where it is most efficient. The second theme we deduced from our interviews was usability and user experience, where these tools help editors to score readability levels of the materials they are working with. And so it helps them to know if they should change some vocabulary for a certain group of audience who might not understand that jargon. But Russell, one of our interviewees, pointed to the fact that currently the AI systems just generate new responses to queries for improvements. I think Colleen spoke a little bit about that. So another theme that we found was human in the loop, where in ideation, so within human in the loop, we talked about ideation and creativity, where these AI systems help in brainstorming and generating new ideas, but it also helps the writers to partner with these systems to solve some of the various problems within contextual, when it comes to contextual information generation. And I will talk about one of those things later on. So yeah, so we discussed expectation gap. And by expectation gap, we mean the disparity that exists between what we expect these AI systems to do and what they actually are doing or what they do for us. And we classified this expectation gap into two key things or ideas: decontextualization and surface meaning making, surface level meaning making. So by decontextualization, our interviewees indicated that while AI systems help them to do routine tasks like copy editing, etc., when it comes to nuanced and structured content creation, they found that there are problems there. So Addison, for example, said that some facts are not correct within particular context when it relates to particular products. And then Andy says sometimes the AI tools mislead and overpromise. So the tool will say, I can do this, but the product that it gives out isn't as good as the promise that it's made in the beginning. So for example, it says it's overpromised certain results, and I was following his advice and it was actually unable to do what I wanted. And Andy also told us a story about how in one task that he was doing, he decided to use Copilot to generate a content for an engineer. And then in his technical writer mind, that the product that was churned out was good enough or simple enough. But when the engineer read the work, the engineer pointed out that there are errors here. So the aspect level kind of knowledge isn't what was produced by the AI. So that leads me to the next level of the expectation gap, where they pointed out that AI systems right now are generating language. They are not generating meaning. So the onus lies on us to be able to rework the language they are generating so that we produce the kind of meaning we want the material to make. And to be able to do this, one interviewee told us about safe and unsafe use cases, where she distinguishes between these terms as knowing exactly what you are working with, which is the safe use case, and then unsafe use case is when you don't know what you are working with. So it is safe to know what you are working with, so that when the AI system gives you an output, you're able to tell if this output aligns with what I gave it to do. For example, if you're summarizing a text, if you know the text, then you can tell if this is an actual summary of the text or there are materials coming from foreign places. So Martina thinks that this is one of the key ways to ethically use these technologies to save us from hallucinations. So basically, two ideas shape the interviews. One, all the interviewees thought that or use AI systems as creative partners, in which these systems help the humans to generate ideas, to edit materials, but humans retain control over the effectiveness, the rhetorical effectiveness of the overall content. And two, vigilance. Vigilance here being that because these tools are machines, they would convey superficial understandings of topics because they are not experts or subject matter content creators. And so it is important for us to be vigilant about facts, contextual inaccuracies, and hallucinations. Okay, so I would end here and open the floor for comments. Thank you.